Hello, I think I'm broadcasting now. So, welcome to the Christmas stream. This is a brand new thing we're trying. I'm trying to do this through Discord, modulating my voice a little bit. Hopefully, everyone can hear me. People will tell me if I'm doing this improperly, but uh, yeah, you can call me 30-year-old boomer all you want. But this year, we're going to be doing a series of live streams, and people are going to be. Yeah, I think I'm going to boost my audio a little bit here. How's this, guys? Pardon me for that soft open. So thank you for joining me for this Christmas stream. This year, we're going to be doing a series of streams on the. I'm not so sure I can get it much more than that, actually. But this year, we're going to be doing a series of Christmas streams and just going over the year in general, perhaps bringing on some oppositional voices. But tonight I want to do a year in review with some of the people from my Discord server called ClearTrads. And we're going to be looking at the year in review, and we're going to be just taking stock of what 2018 meant, what 2019 might hold for people of our persuasion, and then perhaps having some good holiday wishes. We have a variety of people in the chat right now, actually just two, but I'm going to bring them in right now. All right, guys, so we are live. Do you want to introduce? Hello, how's it going? So it's Clinging Mars and Society Man?
Yeah, just to start off, there's some sort of permission issue with this channel where people can't see it.
I know there's a, well, yes, that by design. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay.
People can't just jump onto my channel.
Okay.
believe it or not, although it is the holiday season and it is a season of generosity, not everyone on Discord can hop into this live stream.
Oh man.
So we'll bring people in as permissions are needed. But at the meantime, can people just introduce themselves as you are right now to the chat?
I'm Society Man. Yeah, that's.
You might remember Society Man from an article he wrote in Via Obscura Media under a different name on the movie Get Out. He was also on a live stream a few months ago. Really, I think it was some reaction to the most boring election of all time, aka the 2018 midterms. So
yeah, it was pretty uneventful. I think we spent the whole time talking about everything but that election.
Yeah, there was really nothing to say. The purple puddle, as they call it, right? I think that was the one clever thing Michael Knowles ever said.
Oh man.
Well,
I find Michael Knowles entertaining in like a court jester kind of way.
Well, actually, I don't even find him that way. But just so people know, my intention for this series of Christmas chats was going to be to have the live chats go to charity. Or the super chats, I should say. Unfortunately, it looks like the super chats for good have been disabled on my channel, or were never enabled to begin with. So because of that, I guess I decided to see if I can't match a donation to charity equal to the amount of money I get in super chats. However, because Google takes 30%, please don't give too much, otherwise that will bankrupt me. Yeah. But I will find a way to do this anonymously and post the receipt, because I really don't want to make YouTube's unwillingness to give me super chats for good really stand in the way of actually doing good.
Please don't kill Dave's channel with kindness.
I guess we can say that YouTube kind of learned their lesson from the whole Ralph Retort debacle. They want to be very selective about who is allowed to give.
Yeah, essentially, you have to have certain permissions to do good. Is everyone hearing the Discord in the chat?
Sorry, what was that?
I'm asking the chat if they're hearing people from the Discord. Is it the same volume? But anyway, go ahead. What were you saying about the YouTube?
No, I'm just saying it's an interesting decision on their part. I put it this way: they want to be able to. I feel like have certain controls over certain channels, and certain channels given to charity kind of seems to impede with that control, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because it interferes with their ability to control imagistics, and that can be a huge problem for them. But I don't know. It's been an interesting year. We've gone from essentially, and I was saying to Millennial Woes this time last year, no one in the world had heard what a liberalist is, and I'm not so sure anyone in 2019 will ever hear what a liberalist is. I think it was like the gadfly. It had its time in the year of 2018, and it will never be heard from again.
I mean, impact. Here's what I think the takeaway is. Like, how much impact did the Liberalist really have in 2018?
I mean, there was certainly a group of people who joined the UKIP party with the intention of co-opting it, whether you call those people liberalists or not. There was an uptick in membership and an attempt to sort of a repudiation of the Conservative Party and the way that they were handling Brexit, among other things.
I mean, was that a liberalist thing though? I know that Sargon tried to hop onto that bandwagon, but
Yeah.
it seemed that there were some problems there. Wasn't that the case?
It didn't really pan out to anything.
Yeah, apparently not. Right.
Yeah, it seems like I say this is it feels like we're approaching a time where political change is coming faster and faster.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I was actually going to kind of go through what had happened in 2018. I didn't really have a good political consciousness of what was going to be, what really had been achieved this year. Things just in my own life were moving so fast. I remember it started off with, the first thing I remember in 2018 politically was the stream between Sargon of Akkad and Richard Spencer on. And what was it? That was back when JF and what's his name?
Worski Live.
The Worski Live. Yeah. That was, and I knew at that point I was hearing some kind of turning point. But it wasn't clear what was really going to happen. Obviously the alt-right felt like it was going to sort of pick itself back up in this space, and I don't think it ever did. I think it continued to crumble. I know, and I said this in other videos, but this seemed to be a large part of this was due to the fact that the super chat, the spectacle became king in the space of YouTube.
Even on the left, I think. Like, I mean, look at how much ContraPoints has just ascended, and ContraPoints obviously is like defines herself as much as by spectacle as through any argument she ever makes.
The ascendancy of ContraPoints is an interesting thing in 2018. In 2017, in 2016, I interviewed ContraPoints, or sorry, in early 2017. Both me and ContraPoints started our channels in 2016. Pretty late, actually. Sometime in the summer, early summer. And then by 2017, ContraPoints was still small enough to actually deign to talk to critics after they made a criticism of one of my videos. Then in 2018, ContraPoints has gone from being a large YouTube channel to being an untouchable YouTube channel, to the point where they're getting these glowing write-ups in the New York Times and in The Economist of all papers. I mean, this is crazy. ContraPoints has been someone who's been, well, they portrayed themselves as a critic of capitalism.
And in that interview, like I would point out, like it seemed like all of ContraPoints' time was basically spent focusing on the alt.
Yeah, all of it was her. What was that? Well, whatever you want, whatever pronoun you want to use. It was ContraPoints just taking to task the right-wing populism that, well, if we're completely honest with ourselves, that individual never talks to. They never talk to the kind of people that they're given credit for confronting.
I mean, it's interesting because even back, it was either 2017 or 2016, ContraPoints had a conversation with Sargon that was not overtly hostile.
It wasn't. I don't think ContraPoints wants to come off as hostile to people like Sargon. I think that would sort of diminish their image, the image that ContraPoints has, and how they're getting written up by places like Slate and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, is that this channel is, it fights the alt-right with empathy by understanding what the mind of the right-wing YouTuber is. And as someone sort of as obviously middle of the road as Sargon, for better or for worse, to come off as extremely hostile, sort of the way that Christy Winters comes off when she talks to Sargon, I think would in many ways hurt ContraPoints' image in the mainstream press. That being said, I don't think that the interaction was particularly flattering for ContraPoints. I mean, it seemed like they didn't have a lot of the answers they seemed so confident when they talked about on their channel. On their channel, it seems like there's no reason you'd ever want to go to a counter-progressive source on YouTube if you watch ContraPoints. But when they talk to Sargon, they seem to be more or less put in a few spaces where answers were very hard to get.
And it's just interesting to note that those conversations all sort of diminished, and like the spectacle kind of became king, like as ContraPoints sort of developed, to the point where now ContraPoints like infamously just talks to, various versions of herself.
Yeah, and then you look on the right, you look at the kill stream, or sorry, I get ahead of myself. You look at Warski Live, which then led into sort of the kill stream and what that's become. What's left of Internet Blood Sports, I guess.
Well, I mean, ContraPoints is infinitely more effective than Internet Blood Sports. I know Natalie gets a lot of credit for using like high production values. I guess I've never been particularly impressed by them. It seems more or less like one effect. It's like a low mood lighting, and then like a shot counter shot with themselves. That's like every ContraPoints video, and then like a new costume, right? But it's always shot in the same. It's always shot in the same studio, right? It's always shot in the apartment.
I'd just say to risk going like a little too like filmy with it. Like it's very Gallo. Like it's just these bright neon kind of colors in this kind of dollhouse environment, and with these obvious, like these kind of costumes that it's obvious that ContraPoints really wants to be seen in and wants to develop like kind of personas around. It's just I don't know if it's a style it's at least it's distinct and it stands out. I don't know that it's something that's terribly impressive, but it is definitely, I'll put it this way, it is a step above what almost anybody else who's doing political commentary is probably doing. So
1791L, in my opinion, have some of the best editing of any political channel on YouTube.
Well, sure, but I mean, you could say like, okay, is it 1791L? Is it? And sorry, guys, I see the super chats, but we'll have to wait for a little bit on them just so we can develop some points of conversation. You could say, oh, well, the right wing has a number of channels that have good editing. The Black Pigeon Speaks is another one. I hesitate to say Mouthy Buddha because I don't. Well, truth be told, I think his editing is great, but I'm not so hot on his ideas, or lack therefore of. Sorry, that was a bit of a jab.
It's all good.
The editing of those channels is great, but I think ContraPoints, they're not so far off base when they say that they're providing something that those well-edited channels don't do. They're providing scripts and characters and so on and so forth. The difficulty is I just don't think that if you did that on the right, you'd get nearly as well funded as ContraPoints is. I mean,
there are people who are on the broad spectrum of anti-SJW, like what's he called? One of the Dr. Randomer Cam.
Yeah, but it's still not the same thing as that, though, right?
That's true, but it is sort of the skit wacky.
I
guess. It's a stretch.
The issue, what I've seen of Randomer Cam, like Randomer Cam never really stops being Randomer Cam.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas ContraPoints is like it's all about presenting these sorts of characters who kind of appear like multiple times. It's almost like, I don't want to say Prairie Home Companion, but it's like it's kind of striving for that. There's this kind of little consistent community that like consistent little world populated with these sorts of characters who pop up every so often to react to whatever is on ContraPoints' mind. I mean, it's much more overtly political, obviously, but it's not going for the the aw shucks kind of old timey thing that you kind of get with Prairie Home Companion, but it's a similar sort of idea.
And it's very obvious that their audience will pay for that.
Yeah.
That's
Not
very
very
important to
much.
understand, right?
Oh yeah. You can have really fancy editing. You have your channel look really great. You can have multiple people, storylines, all that stuff. But if you don't make money off of it, then how you're not going to be able to do it full time.
I put this out there. I think editing can be very overvalued.
Hmm.
I mean, it's nice to have editing, and I don't know. I know 17.1. What is it?
1791L.
1791L. I've seen several of his videos, and I think he does have very good editing. But ultimately, in terms of the content he's presenting, it's no different than like what a Sargon might do. You know, it's the same basic concept, just with a lot more flash. Same thing with Black Pigeon Speaks. Same thing with a lot of these guys. Whereas ContraPoints is definitely like trying to deliver a different product.
I think 791L and especially Black Pin Speaks are more significantly to the right than Sargon is.
Sure.
Well, that doesn't matter. I don't think we're talking about how far they are to the right.
Yeah, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just talking about like what their goal is, and
Okay.
just basically essays.
Yeah.
ContraPoints is like presenting essays, but like kind of as a secondary thing to like look at my characters, doing their skits in this, in these little theater pieces.
I mean, I don't know. It's tough. I think that I wouldn't even if I mean, presuming I had people with time on their hands to do this, I wouldn't go like, oh yeah, go ahead and make the conservative version of ContraPoints. I don't think you'd get funders for that. I really don't think you would. I don't know if I remember seeing Adam, and I'm getting some crosstalk from Fritz. Just make sure your mic is
Hi,
well
are you
placed.
there?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So I've seen Friended do sort of a skit comedy, and I thought it was pretty good. This is Adam Friended, but it never really obtained. It was never, I don't think it didn't make his channel, right? I don't think that kind of content appeals to the audience that pays for right-wing content online.
Yeah. What makes Friended's channel is edits of what other people have said.
Well,
I'll put this out. Could you imagine like a progressive version of Internet Blood Sports? Is that even something feasible?
No, it's not. Different models work for different people.
Maybe if the Young Turks had somebody on who slightly disagreed.
I couldn't imagine them taking those kind of risks with their career.
I mean, even like somebody like Michael Tracy would be like, he would probably challenge them on some things, and that would be entertaining. I
mean, I don't know. Like, I think you're missing Society Man's point. Like, could you imagine the Young Turks people taking those kind of risks with their career? Like walking into a room where like any question could be asked of them from anybody. And going,
what do you
think about the Armenian genocide?
Like, no, of course not. Like they would,
No.
that wouldn't be a thing anywhere on. It wouldn't be even a thing on. It wouldn't.
They would lose control of the narrative very quickly.
Yeah, the power posturing would be all wrong. But so we have a number of other people entering the chat. Oh, well, you guys, maybe you could take. I'm going to bring the first round of super chats up. If you want to take, perhaps the new people can introduce themselves. By the way, we're trying out a new form of live streaming that we'll be doing this year from my Discord server, which is ClearTrads. I believe there's a link in the description, but you can also ask me for one, or I don't know if my Subscribestar is still open. I think that's all shut down now. But we are running a series of streams this Christmas season, and Christmas starts today and it will continue on for 12 days. Or I should say it starts tonight and it will continue on for 12 days. And
no, David has started today.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Australia. Yes, of course. International Dateline Man would like us to inform us that he's seen the future and it is Australian. But
could be worse.
Yeah. But marsupials aside, it will start tonight, and we'll be doing a series of streams. I haven't quite worked out the scheduling yet, but I want to make sure that all of the super chats from these streams gets dedicated to charity. Tonight, I don't have a way of setting that up, so I'm going to personally make a contribution and post it on the social media that's equivalent to the super chat amounts I get. So do you gentlemen want to take, while I get the super chats ready, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure.
How about?
I'm Fritz.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
Fritz Imperial. And I've been on hiatus for a while, but I have a whole bunch of new video ideas, and I'm actually going to. I'm getting a new PC in the early year, and so hopefully in January I can start making videos. The first of which is going to be titled something along the lines of why science fiction is better than fantasy, or like the death of the fantasy genre. And I just got back from mass where I had to stand for the whole hour because it was too full. So I got to kneel on the floor, which made me feel very pious.
Fritz, I'm just gonna have to say you're gonna have to sell me on that science fiction killing fantasy thing.
Okay, what have been some genuinely good fantasy series, not including Lord of the Rings or Narnia?
I didn't know I had to pick, but do you want to go on, Geoconservative?
Yes. Hello there. I am formerly known as the Ghost of Buckley. I got interested into the traditionalist community sometime, I would say, 2000, end of 2016, probably. And I've been, sort of buzzing around this Clear Treads area, but I'm starting to. I've got a few videos planned for my channel that I'm hoping to start early this year, and I'm hoping to um, promote some of my eclectic ideas on politics and religion to a wider audience. And also, I'd like to help engage more people with the traditionalist community.
Well, thanks. I think we have one more person, right?
I'm currently Christmas Down Under. I'm normally known as Paul, with various last names. I appear on random streams every now and then, and I try not to be too much of an Australian. Can I say the S word?
I think so.
Yeah, I try not to be too much of a shit poster, but sometimes one cannot help.
So I'm going to read the first round of...
Same here. I am also appear on random streams from time to time, and I'm thinking of maybe posting a video this week. Gonna have to purchase new for that, but and I am an atheist trying to destroy all other atheists and purge atheism from the world because it is cancer. Thank you.
That sounds like a science fiction novel right there. So I've got the first round of super chats. And again, super chats are going to me, but I am going to keep track of how much is donated with my handy dandy made 200 years ago technology called a pen. And then I'm going to make a donation from Via Obscura to the charity of whatever we decide in this very stream. So people should also post, maybe even in a super chat, what you think the charity is that should get a donation equal to the sum total of super chats this streaming time. And we'll have more Christmas streams in the coming days. I'm not so sure about tomorrow, obviously, because it's a day of obligation, but we'll be keeping you guys posted. So YJHVY, thank you for your contribution of $5. Have you found a Muslim reactionary you want to talk to yet? I have found a lot of thank you for your contribution. And the answer is I found quite a few sympathetic Muslims online. Most of them, strangely enough, have been Shia. I find that kind of, and most of them have not been Arab. I find that kind of an interesting quality of most of the sympathetic Muslims I found. Very few of them have been explicitly interested in reactionary ideas, but a lot of them have been very, very counter-progressive and somewhat alarmed and disgusted by some of the, how shall we say, pro-mass immigration voices coming from Europe that seem to be rejoicing in the cultural destruction of both the old world and the new world's Christian heritage. So strangely enough, I found a lot of Muslims who've been very disgusted with exactly how the leaders are handling this. I don't really know what to make of that, but it would be interesting for a discussion. Obviously they're not a representation of Islam writ large, as we are not a representation of Christianity writ large. But I think a dialogue would be really interesting. Patrick,
if you look at former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's Twitter, it's very sort of bizarre. Somebody that, the neocons or the globalists consistently said was, a mastermind of evil. Like today, he just tweeted out like Jesus said to love everybody and, Merry Christmas and peace on earth. And he's constantly talking about how great peace is and like God bless everybody. And it's like, this guy seems so nice.
Well, I'm not ready to endorse all calls of peace from Muslim leaders as being necessarily sincere.
Oh, I know that.
But I do think there's a large overlap in ideological preference, and I have to say, if the neocons don't like you, then certainly there's something that we can agree on. So, Patrick, for $2, remember Trump made it okay to say Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Thank you,
for
Donald.
your contribution. Yeah.
Praise be our president.
Oh, Christmas.
Was he like a Christmas spirit? Like, he did sort of this alternative timeline thing. Like he was visited by 3 ghosts, and at the end of it, they visited Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris and prevented them from making Merry Christmas illegal to say in the United States. I'd like to see that movie.
I think that would definitely be one of those like American, like Republican made conservative movies or pure flicks movies.
Oh,
I can easily see that. I remember
by Santa.
There was a movie made like 10 years ago called An American Carol, where it's like a Republican type made movie where it's, instead of Michael Moore, it's a guy named Michael Malone who's supposed to be Michael Moore, and it shows him like how, and he's proven wrong and shown how Bush era conservatism is actually true and America's great. But what would Donald Trump be?
I remember that movie. That was painful.
You know what?
It's not as bad as the movie.
I'll say, you know what I'm looking forward to in this genre? Has any of you guys seen the Trump prophecy yet?
No.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No. Do I want to?
Please tell me more.
It's a film about a firefighter who had a prophetic dream that Trump would be president.
Did you watch the Simpsons episode?
This is a real movie. I'm actually really eager to see it. So
is Scott Adams playing the firefighter?
No, sadly not.
I'm happy. I'm taking my dad for my dad's Christmas present. I'm taking him to see Aquaman. So I've been thinking of like, should I just get him a glass of water tomorrow morning, just like so he has something to open up? Here's your Aquaman present. It's a glass of water.
So Cameron Gilchrist for $2. Thank you for a contribution. Are you sure it's not working? I'm not so sure what you mean. You mean the super chat system? Well, the super chats are working, but right now they're going to me, and Google is helping itself to 30%. So, I'm going to make a donation on the part of all you guys, but you're currently not giving money to charity, even though you have my word that I'm going to give charity for your donation on this stream. So yeah, it's working in that way. Charlemagne for $5 says, the spectacle is king when the veneration of the material world supersedes that of the spirit. Oh, spectacle is king when the veneration of the material world supersedes that of the spiritual.
Yeah, I would say that's very much true.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good.
What is king?
Spectacle is king.
Okay.
ContraPoints did this, and this is certainly in reaction to one of ContraPoint's more notable recent videos where they did a whole thing about the aesthetic and how spectacle was king in the medium. And no one has more spectacle than ContraPoints. Certainly no one from the right.
It's a very self-interested argument. I would add that like ContraPoints continually justifies this by claiming that like the alt-right sort of plays by this rule or sort of understands it. But
it really doesn't though, right?
Yeah, like put it this way. Like Sargon versus Richard Spencer, like that was not a debate of spectacle exactly. I mean, it was a spectacle of itself.
I mean, the most notable YouTuber, or one of the most notable YouTubers that isn't like studio quality is Millennial Woes. Is there the prestige of Millennial Woes? Is this guy like the new Liberace? Like is like I haven't cut my hair look in 3 months? Like is that procured somehow? Like he
I'm
has like
sorry,
a
but
whole.
If you look at
Wow.
like the Daily Show, which was totally what as much as El Chapo as Chapo Gayhouse tries to pretend that they didn't just straight up rip off Daily Show, we all know that's where they got their formula from. If you compare those two shows, Daily
Wait, I think you're
Show
going to
is
have to
very
back up because probably our audience does not know either of those shows. But I'm
well,
gonna.
they have to know the Daily Show. Chapo Gay House or Chapo Trap House,
Okay,
as it's called, is just like a very.
no, you
It's
don't.
just
Most people don't know that actually. So what you mean is that
oh
the website TRS has a ship posty podcast called like quite quite like this is supposed to make people like ruffle their feathers. It's called the Daily Show. Get it, guys? And in that
yeah.
podcast, they do all of these really edgy racist jokes, and I think they've been doing it since what 2015, and then in 2016, Chapo Trop House came out that had more or less the same formula. So, and you're saying that obviously TRS was copied by Chapo.
Chapo
It's
Trap House,
pretty.
they call
I have
themselves
a
the
very hard time believing. I mean, granted, the format itself has been around forever. They didn't copy that, but the whole idea of
Yeah, I don't.
we're gonna do this we're gonna be this really edgy we're gonna not only are we gonna go against the side we're supposed to go against, but we're gonna go against our side even more because we think it's so stale and outdated, and we're trying to inject new life and new blood into the movement, particularly to get the youth on. Daily Show has started that, and Chapo Gay House is trying to do that with the left. But the thing is, and Millennial Woes mentioned this in your conversation with him, is that the left can never really have something like that because whereas regardless of what you think of ethnostatism, and I'm not really on board with that scene, but I can at least admit that it is challenging the cathedral and the mainstream narrative far more than any socialist fantasy ever could. Like, as much as as Chapo Gayhouse can bleed on about how great everyone would be in a workers' paradise, whatever, they're just repeating kind of the same talking points that we've heard from college campuses for decades
Yeah, so
now.
this is an interesting
And
point. Like, so I actually don't agree with you. I mean, like, the whole like we're gonna go against the normies on our own side. I really don't think they had to look to TRS to get that. I just think that's the zeitgeist. I think everyone's looking to be super edgy, and I think that TRS picked up on it probably a little bit before Chapo did because Obama more than anything else. And I just think that this is just what everyone wants. No one wants to be the square anymore. So if you're on the left or on the right, you just go against your own side as much as everybody else's. I don't find Chapo to be particularly edgy. I was listening to their audiobook on the plane ride over from Europe, and to me, it felt like a Dave Barry column with the opinions of Jon Stewart, where every other line they just took a card out of that deck, that card game Cards Against Humanity, and read it aloud to add like the necessary edgy part to the humor. The edginess felt really, really contrived. Now, I don't know if that's like some implicit thing in the left, and maybe this is just part of the fact that you never think that the other side has a humorous point. But I don't know. What do people think of Chapo Trap House?
I just
Anyone else want to take this?
no.
Well, I've never actually seen Trapo Trap House, but I do notice that a lot of left-wing humor online seems to revolve around, haha, you people, you Republicans are so dumb. It really, their humor seems to revolve around the idea that Republicans or conservatives or whoever they're beating up on are just stupid people.
It makes, yeah, I think if you watch anything like the actual Daily Show, or a lot of these, it seems like, I mean, I think the reason why the humor often fails is because it feels just like a bunch of elites making fun of the peasants, wherein that's not really, the humor is when it goes the other way around.
I'll just say this. I think Cards Against Humanity has kind of like, I think it's ruined humor, and like you see so many people who just think it's the funniest thing, and I don't know, like it wore out like the affection I had for it a long time ago.
But Society Man, I thought Hannah Gadsby ruined humor.
I like custom Cards Against Humanity decks. So
Hannah Gadsby,
I'll apologize on behalf of my nation for that woman.
Hannah Gadsby.
Yeah,
Hannah
yeah,
Gadsby's
Paul.
a gift.
I want preempt reparations for Hannah Gadsby.
I'll say Hannah Gadsby is a gift because you know what, Hannah Gadsby.
That's your Christmas gift, a Canadian impression from an Aussie.
I want to. I'll just say this: I want to watch a white woman lecture me on my male privilege, on my white male privilege. This is what comedy really should have been all along. And I'll just say, here, Hannah Gadsby. Please produce more people of this caliber, Australia.
It is actually true, though. Hannah Gadsby is a boon. And the left doesn't know it, which is why every time I see her promoted, I'm like, this is really good. This is really, really good.
Well, I'm seeing articles, Dave. I'm like, well, comedy doesn't have to be funny anymore. Like,
well, I mean, yeah, but like, just to
Did
go back to the
comedy
previous.
special actually have jokes in it?
No, it had a few. It had a few, but Hannah Gadsby jokes are pretty stale. The only thing that she's really good at is sort of like stepping outside of herself and like kind of critiquing the genre as it stands. But I would say that ContraPoints relative to other YouTubers is sort of, I'm not so sure that they're like $10,000 a month, which is probably what they're making good, but they're pretty good, right? Like they're better than your average YouTube channel. And for paid for content, I'm not so sure that it's really a scam. I don't think ContraPoints is funny, but it has sort of a quality dimension to it, and you just don't see that with Hannah Gadsby. I'm going to read another super chat before people go on. The Rightful King of Finland for £2 says the existence.
That's euros.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misread that. Pardon me. I don't have my glasses on. For €2 says the existence of Berserk refutes Fritz completely. I think he means about the whole fantasy thing.
Yeah, I was going to get to that because as part of my video, I'm actually going to comment on the fact that I think one of the exceptions to, or one of the subgenres of fantasy that has managed to escape some of the issues with the stagnation of the genre is dark fantasy, as it seems to be able to focus a lot more on sort of emotion and ideas of things that are a little closer to humanity, as opposed to just building this beautiful world that you get lost in that will never be close to reality ever. Like, I mean, some dark, depressing fantasy can actually be can actually make you think about stuff, as opposed to, Harry Potter.
But Fritz,
same with dystopian sci-fi.
Okay, but
exactly.
Fritz, I just want to respond to this. You just said, like, kind of listed Tolkien as an exception here, right? Tolkien did everything you're just critiquing right now.
Exactly.
Are you going to include Tolkien? Are you going to include?
No,
Tolkien?
Yes. I'm saying is I think with a few exceptions that relative to say the science fiction genre, I think that the fantasy genre as it stands right now is lacking in many, many ways, and it seems to be very stagnant. I mean, the two most popular fantasy series outside of Tolkien is Game of Thrones and Harry Potter, and I think they both have massive, massive flaws in them.
How's Game of Thrones exempted from that dark fantasy route you're talking
Because there's a difference between, say, something like Dark Souls, which I know it's a meme to bring that up, and Game of Thrones, where in Dark Souls, it's nihilist. It's not exactly, it actually tries to address the idea of a nihilistic, pointless existence, whereas Game of Thrones, it just is. But it never actually really tries to address the universe that is the metaphysics of the universe it's that Martin constructed. The fact that they just assume that the reality is a nihilistic universe where good people are punished, whereas, good dark fantasy, or the ones I played and looked at, they actually seem to make that point of this nihilistic existence is the actual focus, and they're playing with it, and they're actually trying to explore that idea.
Well, I think we might hold the fantasy versus sci-fi thing to the end, perhaps. I did sort of like, I think something that did, since this is sort of a year in review thing, I think that this is where 2000, this is how I want to, this sort of draws everything together that we've been talking about. 2018 is the year where the right tried to take spectacle and edginess and push it as hard as it could possibly go and saw that it got them nowhere. And 2018 is the edge where the left, in particular, fell in love head over heels with edginess and spectacle and wanted to make it all what they were about. I think that is more than anything else what 2018 is. And I think 2019 is going to be the year that the right discovers sincerity and discovers community. And we have a complete changing of dynamic that goes on between the online communities in this regard.
Do you think a part of that was in response to the memes and the Trump effect and the way that the right used?
I think the Trump victory coincided with the rise of meme culture on the right, and this created the impression.
Wait, the rise of what? Or the rise of what? Because
the rise of meme culture on the right coincided with the Trump victory and the rise of the alt-right. And because of that, I think a lot of people on the right got this weird idea expressed as like that there's sort of this magic of memes, and that like memes were this way, like memes were not just a way of sort of capturing people's attention for a moment, but were actually like the key to victory. There is this whole, I mean, this is a very meta meme, but the meme of meme magic, the idea that like if you can meme it into existence. I heard so many people on the right telling me that.
4chan.
Okay, but I think 2018 where the right memed a lot of things out of existence in 2018. And I'm not too happy about that, right? Yeah. I think that IBS memed itself out of existence. I think the liberalists memed themselves out of existence. Well, I don't associate with the associate myself with the alt-right label. The alt-right label memed itself out of existence in 2018. Meme Magic was doing a lot of disapparating in 2018 for the right, and despite the fact that they felt like they controlled it in 2016, it looks like it's not a very reliable mistress.
Well, yeah, I mean, you part of the problem with it's just a meme is that if you're all just memes, what are you actually standing for?
Yeah, that's more or less it.
I think memes only, like, talking points in a way can also be memes if you can turn your talking points into a meme where even people don't agree, they can still listen to it, they still understand what they are. That alone can be powerful if you learn how to direct those talking points into productive memes that can actually gain you legitimacy.
I guess I'm skeptical.
White Sharia is not a good example of that, just as an example.
This is sort of one thing you learn very quickly, is that as someone on the right, the key to success is being sort of quick on your feet and knowing how to sort of take a punch or two inside a live conversation where the framing is constantly shifting, where the expressions are constantly shifting. But if you're on the left, you can quite easily just memorize a list of talking points and positions and postures and carry those forward regardless of how big you get. I know that Millennial Woes' sort of label, and I think it stuck in my mind for ContraPoints, was talking points. And that's true. ContraPoints, with the exception of one or two ideas, the whole spectacle thing kind of was sort of new, I guess. But with the exception of a few things, they've been around for as long as I have, and they really don't have any new ideas. They're more or less just the standard progressive talking points with mood lighting and character shifts and costume changes. You can do that on the left. You can't on the right.
That's kind of the big issue, isn't it? Like the left is kind of having an ever sort of shrinking like pool of acceptable conversation, and there's an ever I'd say, at least at the moment, it feels like there's an ever kind of expanding pool of acceptable conversation over on the right.
Yeah. That will be our chief advantage in 2019, I bet.
I think they're seeing a pushback. I think we before the stream we were discussing of all things PewDiePie and who he follows on Twitter. I think if you've been following that situation at all, and the way that someone like PewDiePie, who has 78 million subscribers, has been dismantling essentially the online mainstream media in his videos, going line by line. Hey, this is incorrect. This is incorrect. This is incorrect. I think that's a big thing for going to be a big thing for a lot of people in the new year is waking up to what the media is and how they talk about people and how often what they say is simply not true.
I guess I'm not so sure. I mean, like, I feel like we've had well, I don't know, maybe I'm just like, this is just my position, but it seems like it seems to me after the last 2 years, wouldn't everyone who can be disillusioned with the media be disillusioned with the media?
I mean, I don't know, CNN blackmailing blackmailing a kid for doing a
Does anybody remember it?
that was a high point.
Yeah, I mean, it really what I found that was very annoying was that anytime the right wing got outraged at someone or something, like CNN in the blackmail, it never pettered out into anything, and it was quickly forgotten. That was something that was very annoying to me.
Well, it's you should sort of expect it. Like I'll put this out there. Like right wing outrage is sort of regarded as something to sort of be dismissed, something to sort of be at best tolerated. But like left wing outrage is treated as something that there's a moral imperative to respond to.
I mean, for instance, just to give you some context, gentlemen, that whole CNN doc scandal, that was 2017. The I should say the Trump the CNN doxing was 2017, so that's been a while. Sarah Jeong getting hired at the New York Times, that was this year. So these, like I said, these right-wing outrages don't go very far. CNN didn't really suffer any consequences from that, and Sarah Jeong's on the editorial board of the New York Times. So,
but I think my point was less about right wing and more about just a collection of people pressing back against what would be viewed as a
here's the
leftist
thing.
narrative.
Here's the thing. You have to learn to press back in a manner that works. And like the right wing is sort of it's trying to ape the left wing's model, but the left wing's model specifically works because it has all of these all of these people in power who are like ready and willing to respond to their like everything that they put forward as like a grievance. And they feel good about doing it. That's the thing.
Yeah, there's a self-righteousness behind it.
That probably also explains why you have the differential funding rates between conservative and progressive activists on YouTube as well.
I'd agree, yes. But what was something that...
So here's
something else that was a big deal in like the early 2018? Do you remember something after the maybe we could talk about like the Sargon versus Richard Spencer debate on...
Well, we actually started there when the stream started. Yeah, I mean this
might be getting a little bit abstract, but here's a question I want to ask. Like what, like just Distributist or anybody who has an answer to this, like what would you say is a good way to get the right to a point where you can have people start to feel good about listening to their grievances in the same way that the left wing has people who feel good about listening to their grievances? That's
a great question, right? I think it's got to start with co-opting some of the left's language that was left at the door. The humanitarian language, the identitarian language, the environmentalist language that was really tossed aside in
the anti-interventionist language.
That's another one.
Noam Chomsky. Thank you, Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Noam Chomsky, the con.
Yeah, no, the left against their own principles, assuming they had any. But yeah, Trump is kind of breaking the left.
Well, we're not trying to throw their hypocrisy in their face. What we're trying to do is
you're trying to own an issue. You're trying to own a humanitarian or a charitable issue and make it a symbol and a banner of your movement. Self-determination might be
you're basically trying to take some tool, some cause, that the left has left behind in its everlasting march of progress, and use that as a new weapon for
I
what.
bring up an example of where I think the guy, because I think the men's rights activists have, to an extent, tried to do that. Now, they're not so much right wing as they are anti feminist, and you can even say anti feminist. They're trying to do that with male suicide rates, for instance. That's where they're trying to co opt some of that humanitarian language to say, hey, what are you going to do with these young men? Even to some extent, they'll even say young white men. They're with the suicide rate continuously increasing for them to a much higher degree, and it's being much greater than that for females. What is your solution to that? And I don't feel like they've really succeeded in doing that. Like, how do you, I guess my question is,
well, if you're specifically talking about MRAs, I can offer why I think they failed. And
not the whole movement, just maybe I'm just asking, how have they not succeeded in making men's? Sorry, continue.
Well, I see. Here's the point. This doesn't translate onto every single issue you can take from the left. But what they've tried to do is they've tried to take the model of feminism, which works because men are biologically programmed to feel sympathy for women. Nobody is biologically programmed to feel sympathy for weak men, which is basically the demographic that MRAs are speaking for.
And so basically the MRAs in the media are portrayed as a collection of weak men. And this becomes sort of a futile charity. It becomes sort of an embarrassing Achilles heel for the feminist movement that rears its head every time the men's rights activists get platformed. But the feminists they're the ones in control of whether they do get platformed, or they have more of a voice in potential platforms. So this only comes up periodically. Michael Kimmel might get embarrassed by Karen Strawn, but he's not going to lose his career over that. He's not going to have to amend his next book because of that. It will be a footnote on the larger cause. And I don't think that's really something that will work very well in the future. I think that it's weak men. I hate to say this. It's just not a very valuable demographic to have. For whatever reason, we can go into it. It sounds cruel to say.
Or at least, maybe in a better way, it's not a good demographic to have as the face of your movement.
Put it this way.
They're trying to engage in victim mentality.
I know this is not. I know we're on Discord, but this is actually a live stream, so let's try to do one at a time. Okay.
This is a fair point you guys are making, but I want to. Okay, so then maybe what's a good example of an issue we can bring up to capture that humanitarian? I mean, we're advocates of traditional Christianity. That's all about caring for the meek, the downtrodden, the poor, the sick, and so on and so forth. We're carrying water for a religion that's based almost completely upon that. How this should be a fairly easy thing for us as traditionalists and for you guys as Christians to do. So how aren't we kind of naturally suited to take the left's humanitarian language and kind of beat them at it?
I'd say the issue, Anarcho, is that the right and tradition itself kind of always had certain institutions to keep that mercy from kind of spiraling off into insanity and sort of becoming a pathology. And progressivism is basically that mercy, totally divorced from anything to keep it in check.
That's exactly what G.K. Chesterton said, something along those exact lines, where he's like, the problem of to paraphrase him, he's like, the problem of today is not that the vices have gotten loose; it's that the virtues have gotten loose and have sort of lost their way.
Well, there's also the fact that the progressives are merciful in a very twisted way. You don't see any forgiveness on their part for for quote unquote wrongdoing.
I think that's a weakness of theirs. I really do. I didn't have time to make this video, but I was going to make a video called, and I probably will in 2019, called "Forgiveness is Our Banner."
Called what?
Wait, what?
Called "Forgiveness is Our Banner," and
Exactly.
I think that the progressive movement's lack of forgiveness will be a serious thorn in its side and something that prevents them from moving on.
Because that's
The
the thing
right wing
is,
has to work to incorporate people that have been put down. We have to incorporate. We're not on the alt right. We have to work with people who are former alt righters. We have to work with people who are former neocons. We have to work with people who are former progressives. Right. This is something that the right wing understands: is that forgiveness is a virtue and a strength.
The
I
Reagan
don't think
coalition.
I
what.
would just say that, like, as long as they demonstrate like a certain understanding of what they did wrong in the first place.
Yeah, contrition is necessary, right? But I think that there are going to be a lot of broken people coming off of progressivism. I still don't know what we're going to do with all the people who become ex-transgender people.
Oh my
That's
god.
going to be a huge demographic, and I'm not so sure what's going to happen with them. I think the left is pretty convinced that they're going to continue to be their loyal foot soldiers. I'm not so convinced.
yeah, it would be a massive. It has the potential to be a huge thorn in their side of if you got if you got substantial numbers of people that are like, I had the surgery or I lived as transgender for a number of years and it ruined my life. It made it so much worse. And, it turns out that, look what it's doing to children and it's ruining so many people's lives. If that can be, if that can have good optics, that would be a massive problem for the left.
Especially, I would say, especially if you got somebody who started transitioning when they were a kid with the encouragement of parents, teachers, and other people like in positions of authority who like now regrets it. That would just, if you could get that person a platform, that would just do so much damage.
It
right,
will.
Dave,
It will if the right does not purity spiral. Like this is a conditional statement. The right can support radicals inside itself. It can say, okay, there's a place for people who have these crazy ideas about how we totally need to remake our society. I, in some ways, am kind of one of those people who think that we need to radically rethink a lot of elements of our society. But if the right becomes seized by one of those elements, and essentially it's used to conduct a huge purity spiral, you're not going to get those great opportunities to cause problems for the progressive movement in the future. I think that's something to really think about.
And I would say the right is not in the position to be able to afford purity spiraling.
Yes.
The left is excluding people from institutions when it purity spirals. When the right purity spirals, it's excluding itself from institutions.
Yeah, and that's there's all sorts of ironies with this too. You get this a bunch in right-wing circles where there's a lot of problems with liberalism as an abstract theory, but there's a problem when you're just like, how dare you support like the free speech right? Like, don't you know liberalism was a mistake 300 years ago? Okay, it was a mistake 300 years ago, but you found a hell of a time. Pardon my
Dave, you're cutting
swearing.
out.
Yeah.
You're really cutting out. We couldn't even understand what
I'm sorry. Let's try that again. Can you hear me now?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I gotta go. I gotta go do family stuff.
Okay, well, have a good Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
You'll encounter this every now and again on the right, where someone will announce that liberalism was a mistake and then continue on with, and that's why we have to not support free speech now because liberalism was a mistake 300 years ago. Well, that's one heck of a time to discover this mistake. It doesn't work. You're not going to undo this mistake by being anti-free speech now that you need it. It doesn't work. There's all sorts of things that the left can do that we can't. Another thing that the left does that we can't, like the left actually plays its bench. ContraPoints gets written up in Slate magazine. When was the last time you saw a YouTuber written up in National Review or Fox News?
Even the right plays the left's bench. The Economist gave ContraPoints a write-up.
Well, I can think of only National Review talked about Ben Shapiro, and then there was a critique
he wrote for them.
Yeah,
he was a guest author on their site.
I would not consider. Yeah, I think the point he's making is that Ben Shapiro is not. There's a difference between say Ben Shapiro and Distributist, or in the sense of Ben Shapiro also has like his own website. He has multiple articles. He's a established name in conservative circles, whereas I don't think ContraPoints was, whereas Distributist isn't as well. But so far, maybe it's not a good example because it doesn't have a huge following. But let's say Distributist had like 200,000 subscribers. Imagine.
Well, Sargon. Even I know Sargon's a leftist, but he's a useful tool against the progressive agenda. So even a leftist like him, he still counts.
Sargon or Tim Pool, or I mean, I saw. I think they may have actually done 1791L or whatever. I think that might have been written up, but any of your standard YouTubers on the mainstream right. They practically don't exist for these mainstream. And it's because I think a lot of these places like National Review, they understand that there's a certain amount of cranky people who want to sit there and complain about the fact that the tide's coming in around them. And they understand that that's a limited resource. And they understand that that's not growing, right? So anyone who cuts in on that's a threat to them, whereas the left is out to conquer the world and they always need more foot soldiers.
Well, so we don't. Yes, Society Man?
I say yes, and I'd say the left has been very good at gradually incorporating. Sorry, not the left. I mean, the neoliberals have been very good at sort of gradually incorporating progressives into their sort of movement / work.
Yeah, I can't count how many times I've seen like these so-called socialists, so-called progressives, actively supporting neoliberalism.
This is something that is smoothed over by the university system. The university system is very good at separating the yahoos and the con artists from people who actually could be worthwhile to trust or that are trustworthy. And that is something that the conservatives don't really have, or the reactionaries don't have. I'm not going to name names here, guys, but I've been looking for interviews for Via Obscura, and I probably will give these people interviews nonetheless. But there are a few people out there with like radical new ideas and like new schools of thought. And I look at them closely and I'm like, I am not so sure this person isn't like a con artist. They have all of these red flags going up about how you shouldn't
Look,
trust
I know
them.
you're talking about me, Dave. Just say it.
Okay. But this is the thing. Like, I think a lot of the people on the distant right, you have a lot of people who are a few breaths away from selling you things on late night television, right? Like it and I think that the university system does a lot of work for progressives in weeding out the malfeasant forces in that regard.
Is it possible? Okay, is it possible to sort of reproduce a system like the university system without an institution like the university?
That's what Mencius Moldbug thought. I think that that's what people on the right wing are trying to kind of struggle with a little bit. It seems like the internet does have an opportunity for that, but no one's really figured out how to solve the trust factor. There doesn't seem to be, and I think that's why getting this whole money thing sorted out is so important, right? Having a stable basis to build some kind of large, to build more or less a salary for somebody is important. You can't live off of $400 a month. It's impossible. You certainly can. I mean, ContraPoints can live. I mean, like I did an estimate of ContraPoints earnings. They're like, what? It's like $10,000 a month, 20,000, depending on how many people are contributing. I mean, like, not only could ContraPoints live off of that, they could get a gender reassignment surgery every 6 months and still be good, right? Like they could go back and forth, right? And they're not going to have. I mean,
they could change
unlike
their mind about the gender they are, just sort of continue. Just constantly reinvent themselves physically and ideologically.
Unlike most conservatives and reactionaries, that they don't want to have kids. They told me they don't want to have kids, but they could afford kids on that donation, like as many as they wanted to. The amount of money they're getting is pretty ridiculous. But maybe with something there you could do it. Do you want to go on for a little bit? I'm going to get together with the next round of super chats.
I could keep going.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay.
As soon as Dave says go ahead, everybody gets quiet, man.
Yeah, jeez. You're falling over for each other for the microphone
I'll
5 minutes
say
ago.
Yeah, I mean, it gets even worse with the. It's not just that make more money than a typical right wing or anti progressive YouTuber makes, and then your Patreon gets shut down because you threw out an N bomb in a random video. It's not even if we're not getting that much money, and then if we do happen to get enough money to actually live on, our Patrons get shut down anyway, and there's not really a suitable platform we have to replace that. Another way to get money from.
That's clearly by design, right? Like that was the whole point of what Patreon did. And I would add, by the way, like that's clearly what they want. They don't want any form of being culturally against progressivism to ever be profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. So super chat from GI Jack for $10. Best wishes. I like to be part of the conversation, but I am with my family this Christmas. Kids come first, That's how it is. Godspeed. Well, that's more to the point. Very good for you being with your family. Kids always come first. Family always comes first. I'm shooting this right in a gap between family and religious obligations. So, yeah, that's how it always is.
At Mass, there was probably over 100 kids that went up to see the priest, when he called them up to do the homily. It was the cutest thing ever. The funniest thing is watching them, seeing how the priest is going to react when the kid says something a bit weird. He's just asking them what is the meaning of Christmas? And most of them say, Jesus, and family's important. And then one of them said, I'm going to have a new baby brother. I don't know why, it was the cutest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, sorry about that.
Apparently that brought silence. Me talking about cute kids at church.
Sorry, my cut out a little bit.
There are no girls in this Discord. You're not going to get an
Well, I hope that's
what are you doing?
That sound.
What noise was that, Narco?
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
we
okay,
hear
great.
you.
Continuing with the super chats. Yeah, I'm not so sure people have got the baby queuing sound down right for that one. That sounded weird. Charlemagne for $5. I think this is addressed to Fritz. Dark fantasy is probably satisfying for the same reasons that Greek tragedy is satisfying, as Nietzsche discusses in The Birth of Tragedy. I'm going to say a few things here before Fritz. Nietzsche is the one Enlightenment author that I thoroughly love. And I've found that of all reactionary Christians authors, usually their favorite one is surprisingly Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is usually the least favorite author by many modern progressives. But yeah, I think the tragic dimension is part of it. But I don't know. I think there's more to tragedy than darkness. But did you want to comment on that, Fritz?
Yeah, and again, that's going to be one of the points I'd want to bring up in the video, is the fact that if you look at the grandfather of where all modern fantasy comes from, Tolkien, it's the fact that Lord of the Rings, The World of Middle-earth, is his attempt to conjoin his own Catholicism with the ancient mythology of Northern Europe. I think that's where, that's sort of the prototype, or that's where a lot of concepts of fantasy originate. But it seems like so much of modern fantasy seems to ignore that. It ignores what makes so many of the ancient, Greek myths or Norse mythology interesting. Because most of those were, a lot of them were just solid morality tales.
Well, I think I always say that I much preferred the Silmarillion and the Children of Húrin to Lord of the Rings for that very reason. It's because they were closer to the source material that Tolkien was actually trying to write in the pattern of. But I'm just looking over my soldier because I know my wife is a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I don't think she likes the Children of Húrin. Yeah, I always felt that the Children of Húrin, which is based off of a Swedish or Danish folktale called Cuervo, which is similar to that, and Tolkien wrote it sort of like a Beowulf set in Middle Earth. Pardon me.
Because I imagine if he had any regrets, it probably would be that a lot of people probably didn't go past Lord of the Rings and read, because he also wrote an English translation of Beowulf. I think he probably would have regretted that more people didn't, use Lord of the Rings as a springboard to this old mythology. They sort of just stuck with Middle Earth, and then you had all the massive derivatives of it, wherein people took away the orcs, the elves, the giants from Middle Earth, as opposed to what actually makes his stories interesting.
If I just kind of want to interject, because I know Berserk was brought up earlier specifically when talking about dark fantasy, and like, if Berserk felt to me like it was almost self-consciously trying to like reproduce
what?
Reproduce what?
Greek tragedy.
Oh.
Okay.
I mean, just insofar as like I don't know, like I'm not going to get into any spoilers here, but I'll just say that the Eclipse felt very much like it was trying to be like a Greek tragedy moment.
And again, like I haven't read Berserk. I know I'm terrible. I'm a bad weeb, so I should get on it eventually. But Dark Souls has a lot of those similar things. The original one, like I don't want to get too into that, but just one example is there's a character named Pinwheel, who is his story is he's a father that lost both his son and wife, and he's trying to bring them back. He's trying to be rejoined with his family, and so he sort of results to necromancy and dark magic, and it ends up with him. He literally gets reunited with his son and with his child and wife in the fact that they get fused into one person.
I hear from the chat that Cuervo was Finnish, not a super chat, but thank you for that correction. All I know was that Sibelius had a kick butt. I think it was it an opera? It was either an opera or a singspiel of some type. I've listened to that, the arias from that over and over and over again, and it's awesome. I always think of that Sibelius piece when I read Children of Hurin or think about tragic drama regardless. So that's a total digression, but since the whole thing was digression, we're going to have to continue to move on. So $10 Australian from Technijima. Thank you for your contribution. Will you invite Angela Nagel on for a conversation? Her book Kill All Normies was great and quasi-sympathetic to the dissident right, considering her declared political positions. Please, I would love Angela Nagel to come on the podcast. I would really want to have a conversation with her and an interview with her. Kill All Normies was good. Again, there are some obvious progressive pieties in there, but Angela Nagel understands the difficulties with modernity, and in a way that a lot of her colleagues at Zero Books just don't. I've seen people from Zero Books appear here and there on YouTube, and I've been pretty unimpressed with them. I mean, they're pretty reasonable, but they just have this mark of being insulated from really obvious questions that they should expect about their Marxist sympathies. And they seem shocked when people bring them up.
But
Angela Nagel seems particularly bright in that crowd, and I would love to talk to her. There might be an opportunity for building bridges to the left with Angela Nagel, if not people like her.
Yeah, no, her essay, like a left-wing case against open borders, is one of the best essays of that type I've ever encountered. And I think that's the sort of thing you should share with like progressive friends who do claim to who do claim to oppose things like capitalism. I think that this is the sort of thing that like absolutely makes it very hard for them to coherently support that position.
Well, I think anti-capitalism is a general bridge. Not just anti-capitalism, anti-neoliberalism in general, and not just economics, but social and political policy as well, is a strong bridge that we can make vaguely between the right and the left. We'd have to determine which parts of the right and the left we're uniting. But I think we as traditionalists are highly disturbed by a lot of the changes that capitalism is making. Though I will say that I think it's like our critiques in capitalism are not only are they a lot more grounded in reality, but just like our conception of like a society, a very religious society, is actually more in line with an anti-capitalist framework. Like just as an example, our support of the family unit. Let me just finish this point. Like just as an example, our support of the family unit. One of Marx's Marx praised capitalism because he believed that it would eventually destroy the family. I think Marx was correct, but I think we as traditionalists, we actually have a much more greater commitment to challenging parts of, not necessarily overthrowing capitalism, but keeping it under control and regulating its excesses. As you were saying, Fritz.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, at least for me personally, is I think this is something that can come into this occurs a lot. Is sort of, I don't know if this. I think this actually occurs on the right a lot more. It's like, I'm thinking specifically of people like Dinesh D'Souza, where they pick a word left wing, or they pick a word that they try and make a word or left wing a catch-all term for everything bad. That's why any of their political spectrums basically have anybody on the right are the good guys, anybody on the left is all the bad guys. That's how you make it so that monarchists, Nazis, and communists are all left wing. I think just like blanket capitalism isn't really the best way to say it. I think it's because, even for me, I think generally if capitalism as in a market economic system based on a free market on supply and demand is fine. I think it's more we're against a lot of the social effects of it, the consumerism and materialism, rather than the fact that, because if you actually look, I think there is still a good argument, not to sound like a libertarian here, but that the implementation of a worldwide free market has pulled millions and millions of people out of poverty. That's not what I'm against. I'm against the fact that mass consumerism.
I mean, guys, this is I need to say something. Like, you can go on to like what you're against and how we're better and how we're this or I'm that or the other thing. The fact of the matter is that that's something that's not going to be heard by people who are temperamentally not on the right. The reason why I think Nagel's piece was such a gem is that it was something that you could imagine a middle of the road, I hesitate to say boomer, but you know who I'm talking about, a middle of the road boomer reading and in actually reconsidering a core position. And once they reconsider that core position, the next time they turn on The Daily Show and The Daily Show portrays all people who have this opinion as troglodytes and racists, maybe they'll start suspecting that this isn't exactly the unvarnished truth that you're always supposed to accept it as. And there might be some skepticism coming up, but I need to move on to the next super chat here. Charlemagne for $5. To understand why left and right tactics differ and can't simply be transplanted from one side to the other, read David Hines on the Status 451 blog. David Hines on Status 451 blog. I never heard of David Hines. Does anyone else know that person?
He's totally unknown to me.
Maybe I can toss him an email and see if he would come on for an interview. That might be a good person to get in contact with. I'll go on to read another, since no one knows who's... Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Charlemagne. I'll look into that person. Dimitri Garlic for $5. Thank you for your contribution. He says, I love your work. It would be very interesting to see you try to find and talk to reactionaries from non-Western sources, i.e. India, Iran, and Japan. Of all those options, I think Japan is the one that probably would be the most useful. Obviously, there's a very famous reactionary author, Yukio Mishima, from Japan, and it's also in a similar stage of economic development. India seems to be the hardest. I don't doubt that there are Indian people who have reactionary point of views, but I think that because of where India is developmentally, a lot of their objections will still be encased in third worldism, which, to me, I don't know. I think finding somebody who'd be sympathetic to the cause in the West might be quite difficult, just given how current power dynamics work in that particular sphere.
If I may say something, I think that's sort of doing this would be very interesting, because the fact that these countries, with the exception of Japan or non-Western countries, they don't. I think the difficulty with understanding sort of reactionary thought there is that in these countries they don't exactly have they don't really have the same position, wherein most of their institutions are controlled by people that seem to explicitly want to destroy the heritage and culture of that country. Now, Japan certainly has a problem of modernity, but it's the only one. I think the only difference between Japan and, say, a country like Germany may just be its immigration policy.
But maybe that immigration policy is enough to make like
It's certainly going to be substantial because, yeah, the fact that Japan does not have to deal with a massive foreign population, and the fact that there is still some, but the thing is, like, you still have huge suicide rates in Japan, huge amounts of obesity, and a massive lapse in child birth rates. So it's still dealing with. Go ahead.
they have all those issues, but I would say that like the big thing is that they don't have this kind of like they don't have this sort of group within their society that kind of seems to like sort of exist just to kind of
They do. It's just not in power. Japan is, at least when it comes to like trying to keep alive the Japanese race or the ethnic population of Japan. It's nowhere. There's definitely a faction of that exists in Japan. It's just nowhere near as big, or at least it's not in power the same way it is in Europe.
Well, I mean,
Well,
this is the thing, and I'll say this to kind of put a capstone on this comment. The right has to move on from being an objection, where the objections that we have as Westerners are going to be quite different than the objections of right-wingers in Japan. It has to move on from being an objection to being a vision of the future of the human race. If it's a vision of the human race that is not anti-culture dissolved in consumerism, I think you might have allies from Japan and Iran and India come on board, even if the situations economically and in some cases culturally, as in Japan, are massively different. So I said that to Millennial Woes, but I really don't think I got through to the alt-right crowd when I was talking to him. I think they just thought I was, I don't know, telling them to go away or something.
Well,
Yeah.
the problem was that they are very much, the alt-right are very much consumed by their fear of something called universalism, which is basically this idea that if you try to say anything about humanity in general, then that erases the differences between the different races of the different cultures.
Here's what I think if I
think
can
that's
say
a very good point, actually. You want to say something, man?
I think that the distinction that like needs to be drawn is the difference between saying there's like you can say say universal statements about man and even assert universal values like about how man should live, and like that does not mean what it sort of implies in the West, which is that then all people should sort of like live together as if there was no boundary between your family member and somebody else, like completely alien to you. Like it's basically like that. Like in the West, that's kind of become perverted, and it sort of implies this total abolition of closeness to any particular group of people.
There's
people take egalitarianism from it. Like, yes, universalism implies egalitarianism in ethics. In other words, you wouldn't impose a different type of ethic, or even like this goes to our sorts of friends of reference like science and whatnot. But the idea is you don't ever like to go with, like, say, for instance, natural rights. Everyone has the same rights. You wouldn't deprive one person of another, and that you wouldn't deprive for yourself. Right? That's the idea of universalism. And, treat others like you wish to be treated. That has nothing to do with egalitarianism, where you assume all cultures are the same. Christian culture and Muslim culture, no difference. All the genders can do the same thing, and we should have 50-50 men, women in all our various institutions. That's what universalism has been conflated with, this egalitarianism and also you could make this cookie cutter, like everyone's just an individual snowflake that can achieve whatever they want, and there's no collective. That's where universalism has been perverted. But I think the right has to make sure to make a distinction between universalism, which is what Christianity is founded on, which is what has made the West great, and this new egalitarianism perversion, which has given us the multicultural hell we have today.
So anti-universalism is a lack of imagination on the right. Okay, can you wrap it up, because I need to go into the next super chat, Fritz?
Okay, all I was going to say is I think that this question has probably already been solved by our medieval or pre-modern ancestors, and the fact that you can sort of have both. You can have both an understanding that there is a universal, that all human beings are made in the image of God and have souls and are entitled to a certain, dignity, but also understand that medieval man would have, or pre-modern man would have understood, okay, yes, the Muslims in the Middle East, they're also humans made in God's image, and that they have souls and all that. But we're not going to let them mass flood into Europe. Like there's an understanding that you can have it, believe in both. There is both substantial differences between human beings, whether it be between ethnicity, gender, or whatever, and understanding that there is still a all connecting humanity.
Like in TLD,
I thi-
TLDR, you can have you can say meaningful things about humanity while recognizing there are different modes of humanity.
Okay, moving on to the next super chat. The rightful king of Finland for €2 says, the right, says you're wrong. The right, says you're evil. Thank you for your contribution, the rightful king of Finland. I think this gets back to sort of the famous distinction, and a lot of conservatives have pointed it out, that at least classically, the right has made a more argumentative objection, and the left has made a more moral one. Now, my 2 cents right here, and you guys can run with this if you want, is that it may be deceptive to look at this dynamic and go, well, if this is true, the right should start going around calling people evil. That's the classic inversion fallacy, and that's what the right's struggling with. The left might be able to call people evil, but that's because it has a certain amount of infrastructure and a certain amount of groundwork that the right just doesn't have. The right doesn't have the ability to say that yet, except in a few distinct circumstances. And it probably won't unless it really changes what it's doing on the ground.
Like a collection of people on the internet, like who think you're evil means nothing. But like entire institutions with the ability to deprive you of your livelihood that you're evil, that's an entirely...
The cathedral has literally replaced, the sort of general Christian consensus of morality, and the university system, the media, is able to decide, Ben Shapiro or the conservatives, they can't really call people that are pro-abortion evil because the cathedral has decided for society that abortion is not evil.
So we need to make clear here that when you say the cathedral, all you mean is that the contemporary consensus of society is progressive.
Yes.
So what you're saying is that the progressive consensus replaced the Christian consensus. And now our reigning societal cultural consensus is progressive. And without the reigning societal consensus at least somewhat backing you up, an assertion of the other side being evil is more or less meaningless. It would just be like the Taliban called you evil or something like that. It's a detail, nothing really to take note of.
It would be some random pagan in 13th century Europe saying that the Catholic Church is evil.
I mean, here's a question: how much do like your wrong versus your evil arguments? How much like does your evil, does that have more persuasive power with people in general though? Over time, does that kind of work its way into people's consciousnesses in a way that you're just wrong about this issue, that doesn't?
I'll say this, society man. I mean, there are certain things that are just morally ugly, like the fact that PayPal and Patreon are obviously colluding together against their competitors is morally ugly. The fact that half of progressive Twitter and everyone to the left of David Sherratt is just sitting around gloating while their enemies get deplatformed. That's morally ugly. And pointing that out just very neutrally and asking people if that's right is something that can shift the moral frame without using so many words, without trying to essentially play more moral force than is really than you've really earned or your side's really been able to put together, if that makes any sense.
So you're going to put it into the form of a question,
Well, it's more just you have to
invite rather than making proclamations. You would say you would invite the onlooker to question the current narrative. Is this actually right? Is this okay?
So you don't even necessarily have to question exactly. Like it's more just like you have to understand you don't have the moral authority to sort of enact punishments in the way that like progressives do. Like you can still make assertions, but you just have to understand what assertions work and what assertions don't. And I don't think it hurts to ask questions. Like I guess I distinguish asking questions from like.
No, I meant what I meant by putting it in the form. I didn't say asking questions. I meant putting your moral condemnations in the form of a question, like
or in the form of a plain observation. Like I can say like Christy Winter's scoffing that Sargon got unceremoniously had his income terminated. That's really gross. Like I can say that and people know what I'm saying. I could say that to anybody, and I could say that to David, well, maybe not David Sherrod, but anyone with actual moral sense will immediately recognize the truth of that statement in a very real way. And no ideology really needs to be, brought into it. Whereas if I were like, oh, socialism is evil, guys, like, no, that's not going to fly. Or making statements that require me to presume socialism is evil, right? That's not going to fly.
The classic example of this is the Democrats are the real racists, and that worked out so well.
Well, the problem is they were. Dinesh D'Souza assumes that there is an objective definition of. I mean, by the way, speaking of magical words, I did one of my favorite series that Distributist did this year was the Magical Words series. And I noticed that during your chat with Millennial Woes, you were really resistant to using the word white or whiteness because was that because white is a magical word?
It's a magical word, yes. And you can tell it's a magical word because I'll just play it for the chat here. If I were to come out in this chat and said that, like, I support white nationalism, account over, right? If I said that I support nationalist parties for indigenous European peoples, that just sounds like I think that Viktor Orban is an okay guy, right? YouTube career, not over. Like,
you cut out in the middle.
You cut it.
Okay, so if I came out in this chat and said I support white nationalism, my YouTube career is over, right? If I came out on this stream and said I support nationalist parties for indigenous European peoples, the YouTube career isn't over. It just seems like I think Viktor Orban and the current government of Poland are pretty good, right? This is a classic magical word. And yeah, I'm afraid whiteness falls into that category very distinctly.
So, so would you say that one of the first things, more people need to be educated on that sort of thing, because what you find on, like you said, what you find in those videos, what you find on the alt-right is that the alt-right's reaction to all of these magical words is basically to say, yes, we are racist. Yes, we are sexist.
Well, I mean, that was the right in 2016. I don't think it's going to continue. But yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. It's hard. Everyone is going to say magical words. That's just how it is. And it will always be a thing. It's not going to be something that we can ever prevent. But I think it's important to make sure that we're not, by the words we select, just handing victories over to our opponent. So Clinging Mars, I guess he left the chat and he left a $2 donation. Thank you very much. He said Merry Christmas to all. And then Red6UA says, can you talk to leftist debaters, specifically Destiny? So lots of people have asked me about Destiny. Okay, here's my rule. If you got an email address for Destiny, I'll email him and invite him on my channel. If Destiny invites me on his channel, I'll go on his channel. Every time people have asked me to debate Destiny, I've said I would. But then I asked, how do I get in contact with him? And the answer is I have to go into his Discord server and wait in line with the other plebs and petition the king to hear me upon his throne. I go, Destiny, hear my objection, Lord. I think you're wrong. And then, of course, like, I have to, and of course, like, I have to play this game where like I have to make an argument that is more convincing than Destiny's ability to erect an evidentiary standard that can't deny it. So I basically have to assert something faster than he can deny it, and that's impossible. It is impossible to assert something faster than he can deny it. I know for a fact that Destiny's positions change. When he was talking with Christy Winters, when he was talking with, what was it, two plebs or any other people or half the other people on the progressive side, he's like, liberty, 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 my choice, my choice, my choice. He talks to Christy Winters and he says, the biggest mistake anyone can make is that human beings have free will and we should take it into account when we're doing good policy. It's totally inconsistent. If Destiny wants to have a conversation on something, and this is my policy with Kraut too, if Kraut wants to have a conversation with me on something, then like, let's do it. But like, I'm not going onto their server waiting and petitioning the Great Lord Naster. Like that, I'm sorry. Like I have self-respect. Like we're meeting as equals, or we're not meeting, or we'll meet in the live stream, right? I don't care. But like we're not doing this like, oh, random person from Discord, right? Like you're on air. Like I'm not doing the Destiny call-in show. Thank you very much.
I will say, Distributist, when you get big enough, you may find Destiny sort of harassing you on Twitter, like leaving the odd passive aggressive comment or two, because that sort of seems to have been the way in which he sort of got debates with people like Jontron and Sargon and that whole kind of right crowd, which I would say was very popular.
Is he still on Twitter?
He may have been banned. I'm not sure. I'm not a close follower.
Well, I'll have to see. I'm going to peel off some super chats and we can get back to the good stuff. Pseudo-analysis for $5. Nietzsche was romantic, or at very least anti-enlightenment. Either way, happy Christmas. I'm going to go eat some pork with the friends and family. Well, thank you very much, Pseudo-analysis. And thank you for the contribution. Horrible and Strange for $10 says, thank you for the quality content and Merry Christmas. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll have some more live streams coming up. One I want to have with leftist YouTubers to see if we can't come to agreements, Christmas time truths, so to speak.
I think that's a great idea.
So from Brandon for $5, donate to St. Vincent de Paul charities. Excellent choice. And that's the first recommendation in the Super Chat for where all the money everyone else has donated in the Super Chat's going to go. So I guess the donated money is going to go to St. Vincent de Paul. If we do not have any objections, I think that's a great idea, Brandon. I will definitely do that. I was thinking you might recommend the American Solidarity Party. Here is Keith Johnson for $2 American. Thank you very much for your contribution. He brings us back to something that's topical that happened in 2018 very recently. Did anyone see Matt Christensen's talk with Patreon?
Yep, I saw Sargon and V's what's it called? Redoing of it, or dramatization of it.
Historical reenactment.
Voice. Yeah, V's womanly voice was excellently tuned, and V should probably consider a career in Hollywood, basically, is what I think. No, but that whole thing was just, I mean, did I expect much better from what was basically just a Patreon lackey there to give the standard corporate line of, and then eventually being driven to say, we're not a free market. And then it's just like, wow, where do you even go from there? And anyways, you guys' thoughts?
My thoughts? I'll say move over ContraPoints. V is the new woman on YouTube.
There is something very Monty Python or vaudevillian about the whole performance. I almost saw, I already sort of imagined, like, the Monty Python always went in for these, like, incredibly unrealistic men dressed as women sort of thing. There's definitely something with V there.
Yeah, no, it was a good falsetto.
Anyways, yeah, beyond the actual dramatization, you guys think of the call itself, though?
Corporate bullshit.
PR talk. There was nothing there that I didn't expect. Like, it was just a lot of non-answers and a lot of just sort of, we reserve the right to judge these things on entirely sort of arbitrary, on an arbitrary basis, which gives us all of the power, of course. But we also, want you to feel okay about this, and like continue to use our platform until we decide to exclude you. Like that was it.
Yeah, I did think I didn't think that they would put it in that stark terms, though. Like, one thing that was kind of struck me about that conversation is that they definitely put it things in sort of these very stark terms. No, not, I mean, yeah, they had some like corporate speak, and some, yeah, yes, we're for free speech, but those little caveats. But all in all, it was very stark. Like, it was very obvious what they were doing. It's not so obvious normally. Like, normally when you try to nail a progressive to something, they wouldn't just go, "Yes, this is entirely subjective." you know, they don't usually do that. They don't usually admit that.
I throw out a theory. I think we'll be seeing progressivism do that more and more, though. Like, we're gonna see it become more and more obvious as time goes on. Like the kind of the more subtle variation is much more 2000s, and like 2010 is like the decade of progressivism gradually becoming more overt, less persuasive, more shrill, generally worse at accomplishing what it wants to accomplish, even while it has more power to accomplish what it wants to accomplish.
So it'll be more raw appeals to power. I mean, you saw this in Christy Winters too. Winters didn't put forward an argument about why Sargon should be taken off the platform.
Yeah,
she made an appeal to power, right?
Yes.
Well, I mean, well, it's just like, I've talked to progressives online about this, and they seem to have this opinion that, well, if you, this is just the free market at work, and if you really wanted to fight this, you would have been a socialist like us.
Okay. Now I'll put this to you, Buckley. Now just ask them if they support the free market, and like if they're claiming they're socialists, they probably don't, right? Do they only support the free market when it's able to stick it to, like, conservatives?
That's a $1 million question.
I mean, everyone knows the answer on an emotional level. And on an emotion level, it's gross.
All couples that come through their doors, the thing is, they're not even like the New York Times did a whole op-ed about how a movie theater in where the Alamo Drafthouse should be able to discriminate against men at a certain screening. They don't give a shit about anti-discrimination or any of that crap. They just want to use that as a cudgel, as a club they can use to enforce the culture war. That's all.
They don't see. They don't. It seems like many progressives don't have a real. They don't have an anchored ideological position when it comes to the free market. They're using it whether or not when it suits them, because obviously they can say, well, no, we need to regulate things for socialism, or when Christians don't want to bake a gay wedding cake, but then they can immediately say, no, when a company bans you because you have the wrong political beliefs, well, they're a private company, they can do it.
Most people understand that this is a gross position, and neutrally pointing out to them, like in a very non-ideological way, in a very non-emotional way, people will understand that this is just gross.
And
this is a raw appeal to power, and that will stand out. You don't need to actually the less you embellish it with like how bad my liberals are being, like the less you embellish it with those details, and the more it just sticks out as a raw reality, like the more effective it is at actually taking people forward.
I agree with that.
So how would you phrase it then?
Christy Winters is morally gross and is perfectly comfortable accepting raw appeals to power. No, I mean, I would literally say that in the case where she's gloating. Yeah, I could use that word.
You kind of stick the details in. You're giving like a progressive hooks to sort of like discount you. Like when you just say, like, I don't know, Christy Winters is just basically giggling at at corporations like just fucking over another human being.
Yeah, I guess that's a better way to put it. That's a better way to put it. Like, perhaps gross was a bad word. I didn't mean it in like she's physically gross. I meant like she's doing something morally, like her. Yeah, I mean she's basically playing the corporate lackey, right?
Well, I just say, it doesn't seem like, I just note how, it doesn't seem like you're really against capitalism then.
Well, I mean, you're not telling this to Richard Winters. You're telling this to a third party, right?
Yes.
You're pointing at this person, going like, okay, really, guys, like really, like this is your progressive person who's representing you on YouTube. Like, this is the reaction we're getting. I don't know. I mean, I think it works to a certain degree, and people understand that there's something wrong with that.
I do think so too. I mean, the average I don't think the average person or even necessarily the average progressive looks at that and says that that's okay. I think that they understand that. Well, hold up. I mean, when you talk to like a progressive culture warrior, they are they understand that that they can use corporations to do their bidding, even if they don't admit that. Whereas, like the average progressive is the average Bernie Sanders voter isn't going to say, "Raw, yeah, corporations are good when they do things we like."
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm. Everyone knows that. I mean, I know it needs to go a little bit beyond that and focus a little bit more on just how there's sort of a perverse dimension to this that is somewhat unremarked on. But I'm going to go on to the other super chats here because I think we've beaten this one to death. Charlemagne, for $5, you should try conversing with Owen Benjamin on magical words. He has a big audience and he did a great video on wizards and spells. Well, great. I would love to interview Owen Benjamin. I should hit him up on Twitter, I think. He might actually say yes to an interview on the podcast, on the VOR podcast. I don't know if there's much to remark on that other than that. Thank you for your contribution. That's a good idea. Technogema says, for $5 Australian, when and how did liberalism morph into progressivism in academia? W.E.B. Du Bois in the early 20th century sociology, perhaps? I mean, I don't know. I think they kind of coexisted for a really long time.
You went over this in your debate with Sargon, didn't you? This is kind of like what your conversation with him was about, how liberalism kind of inevitably lended itself in a position where it couldn't do anything but yield ground, intellectual ground to the progressives, because it wasn't even, it just that it wasn't even taking a stand on very crucial social issues where progressives had a very clear forthright agenda of what they wanted to promote. They wanted to fight a certain culture war, and liberals were like, they're basically like, they were to the left what libertarians were to the right, just let people be, don't force your opinion down people's throats. They didn't really stand for anything, and so they ended up
a few specific universities aside and a few communist professors from the 40s and 50s aside, the progressive, the anti-liberal progressive force in the universities was very, very weak. The conquest of the universities from 1900 to 2008 was a liberal one. It was a slow deconstruction of the Christian mission of the universities, replaced with nothing. Now, I think in the 60s, this nothing began very, very slowly to be filled in with progressivism, until the point where we had the retiring of the silent generation in the early 2000s, and this created the sort of lurch that we saw in 2008 to 2012, where it suddenly went from being a university that was left to a university that was radical left and suddenly anti-liberal, where it had been liberal all the way back in living memory. And I think this is something that it's basically that process. Now we could talk about this being sort of a core weakness of liberalism, but I probably am. I feel kind of almost guilty like talking about that. There's no liberals to really defend themselves here, are there?
I would just add sort of like, if you want to do that kind of thing of like where you want to turn the left's tactics back on it, that actually is one of the most fertile, I think, examples you can follow. Look at what liberalism did and try to follow that rule. Try to just deconstruct progressive memes, progressive assertions. Go through it piece by piece, and you don't have to assert anything. You just have to deconstruct what they're asserting because they're in positions of power.
Well, this actually gets us to the most interesting conversation that we've had on our server. And I know we're coming up on time. We've got about 15 more minutes here since we started 10 minutes late. But this gets us to our most interesting conversation that we've had on our server. Uh, the last month has been, okay, how do we conduct ourselves? How do we build community online? Because there's sort of two halves to it, right? There, on one hand, you have the fact that, okay, if you want to be like the best deconstructor ever, if you just want to grind all of the progressive arguments down and you want to make sure that you're nimble and you can never be nailed down by anything else, you want to have like as few ethical constraints as possible, and the only ones you want to hold to are the ones that the progressive communities hold to or have to hold to, because if you don't, then your community just backstabs itself to death and you devolve into shitposting and doxing and all that horrific stuff. And that's the way you become the most effective deconstructor of progressivism. And on the other hand, you have people going like, okay, well, if we want a community, we're going to have actual moral standards. And that means that we have to actually lay down the law. So how do you build community and also become the perfect deconstructor without going to the lowest common denominator? We've been talking about this. It almost seems like you need to have two standards, one public rule set and then one private aspirational rule set. That sounds almost unchristian, but I don't know how else you can really process the battles you have to fight online.
I mean, you could do maybe. I mean, maybe you don't have to fight every battle. I mean, maybe you just do want to like assert a community, and it's a community that say progressivism wouldn't allow to exist. But you can just sort of allow liberals to do, people who want to follow the liberal model and just do deconstruction, allow them to do their thing, deconstruct progressivism, and progressives can allow people who want to build communities to do their thing too.
I mean, if you look at it historically, if you're talking about what I think you're talking about is, let's take the early church as an example. You have sort of both in that. You have the sort of loud mystics. You have the people that sort of seem crazy, like John the Baptist, but then you also have the people that built the communities. I don't think that it necessarily has to be anti-Christian. You can have people that speak truth to power. You can have people that are the voices in the wilderness, but without having to break actual moral grounds. You don't have to have like a traditionalist version of Milo Yiannopoulos, wherein they'll say that they're conservative, but they don't believe in any, and they don't live by any conservative principles.
Yeah, but Society Man, and I'm playing devil's advocate here because This is certainly not something that Christians can do. But like Society Man was really good at pointing out this in a different conversation that was private. He and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Society Man, but something along the lines, and this is correct, he said, if you go along and start making moral pronouncements in the abstract about how you shouldn't gossip and you shouldn't swear and you shouldn't make presumptions about your opponent that they don't explicitly say, and then you get in an internet fight and words are spoken and you say one of those things, they're going to haul that standard back and throw it in your face. And it's going to hurt way more than if you had made no moral pronouncement before that.
Actually, I have to go now. Christmas dinner with family. So thanks for having me on. Merry Christmas.
We're going to end in the next 10 minutes, but thank you so much. Have a nice day. Have a nice Christmas. Merry Christmas, Fritz.
So I do see that sort of problem. Like, one of the things that we did talk about on this server was like, we couldn't even decide what the bare minimum. We could barely decide what the bare minimum was. Like we agreed. Like, we got to agree that, okay, doxing was wrong and lying is wrong. But that's very, low common denominator. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is going to have to be a conversation going forward. It is. I think 2019 is going to be the year of community building, and not the year of edginess. But we'll have to see exact. I think it's going to be much more productive for the right.
I guess what I just say is regarding the, like, you don't want to assert too many sort of rules that you might think could be conducive to better discourse. And the reason why I'm saying that is because obviously an environment like Twitter or most other sort of online environments similar to Twitter are environments that are kind of a free-for-all in terms of like they exist to sort of have people kind of go at each other and lay into each other. They're not really community environments. rules. Now, if you're talking about building a community where you can assert these sorts of rules like objectively, and you can't just place them on yourself, and your enemies are free to sort of peck at you while violating those rules, and sort of and then sort of jeer if you happen to violate them. That's a different thing, right? Because that's not a proper community, and you can't really establish a proper community in an environment like that.
I think you're onto something there, because we've talked a little bit about the trope, and I've been talking about this trope where it's this modern Christian trope where we just send people off into the wild and say, okay, here is it, goodbye to rails, just go out there, be virtuous, don't give in to temptation, guys. That just let them just releasing them like birds into a jungle full of wild beasts.
Yeah. This isn't going to work. So we were winding down the stream now. I'm totaling up the donations. So I don't know. Do people want to close out? We have a few more super chats, but I'm not going to be able to read them. Does anyone want to talk about Christmas wishes or what people would like to have for future Christmas streams? I think we're going to do about 2 more.
Oh, well, I'd say that what I think should be talked. I think we should do a future Christmas stream. Maybe a little bit of something about just how I think an important thing to an important Christmas stream is what we need to be thankful for. That could be a good live stream.
That would be good. I mean, it's something that I think I don't know how to stretch that out to an hour. I mean, I certainly am thankful. I should say I don't know how to stretch that out to an hour without it becoming extended biographies of people that could risk doxing.
But there could be like some of the maybe it could be like thankful for what were the good things that happened this year that aren't like related to doxing.
Well, maybe people could bring that up in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Any thoughts?
I'll just say one of the things like about Christmas time that this is slightly unrelated, but I just want to say like one of the things I do appreciate about Christmas time, in spite of all of the really kind of bad like 50s, 60s like sort of lounge songs that kind of gets passed off as sort of like what Christmas is. Like Christmas is one of the few times when you really can just sort of kind of find like a connection to a sort of like more devout past, a more traditionalist past. I mean, it's there and it's sort of at the fringes right at this moment in time. But it's not hard to go look at like a mass performance of like some really, really beautiful songs.
Yeah, I mean, and it's cheesy, right? But I mean, my family saw the Christmas Carol the other day, and that warms every secularist's heart, despite the fact that it's like you're the living embodiment of the stodgy 19th century Victorian Christian morality, right?
Yeah, there's I don't know. I mean, the Christmas Carol, you're talking about that?
The Christmas Carol, yeah.
Yeah, kind of funny about that. I mean, from what I've seen, the only people who don't like that are libertarians.
What?
Is that a real thing, or is that like some stupid Ayn Rand thing?
I mean, I didn't need.
Yeah, I mean, there's
a not like libertarians, but you just gave me one.
Well, at the very least, Academic Agent did. I don't know if it counts as Poe's Law or something, but Academic Agent and a few libertarian publications did like did like stuff attacking Christmas Carol for its anti-capitalist messages.
Since this is going out
literally
in public,
like them being like little edgelords. Like,
since this is going out in public, I have to say, like, I'll make an exemption for Academic Agent. He's the good one. He's the good one.
Well, you should watch his video and decide for yourself. I personally think it's kind of Poe's law, but he does. But he just tries to provide an Austrian economic perspective on the Christmas Carol, and he basically claims that Ebenezer Scrooge will turn himself out of business because he'll give away all his money.
God, I don't know, man. The academic agent might be the good witch in this case, but I'm so tired.
Autism.
I'm so tired of this. Like, I feel like I've been hearing this since the '90s or the '80s. Like, every time, like, and it's every time I hear this argument. Oh my god, I'm being so bad. I'm being so bad. Like, I think Darth Vader and the Imperials were the good guys. I think Ebenezer Scrooge were the good guys. It's like, at least the alt-right and the 4chan crowd, like, they've got some originality by like taking the side of racists. Like, this whole greed is good stuff. It's at this point it's like really cliche, I mean. Okay, so one last super chat from Starscream 1540, and they say, what do you think about the Catholic Church trying to protect Kavanaugh from liberal witches' attempt to hex and curse him? I have not heard this news item this year. Does anyone else know what
Yeah, you should really watch like Sargon's new video on the Thinkery about make witches great again. He actually calls you out and said when he reads about like a Catholic priest from California saying, "Oh, I take these witches are a serious threat to Donald Trump." He says, "These are your people, distributists." Like,
Well, I don't know what to say. I guess there's some things I'm just really glad not to be involved with.
I mean,
but thank you for the super chat.
Are we going to start holding Sargon accountable for everything a liberal says? I don't know. I don't know if he wants to go down that route.
Like, well, just
is David Sherrod a liberalist? I don't know. I mean, I feel like he probably
he calls himself a progressive on his Twitter script.
Okay, well, I guess he used to be. All right, so for last super chat for $5, have you ever thought of having Ed Fesser on Via Obscura? Yeah, he's on my list. I haven't contacted him yet, but thank you very much, Bookgeek7. So, guys, we're over time now. Any final thoughts before we close the thing down? Thank you so much for your super chat, guys. Just to let you know, it's $106 for my tabulation. I will double check it, but if no one has any objections, this is going to $106 from this chat are going to St. Vincent de Paul. So thank you so much for your guys' contribution. And Merry Christmas to you all, okay? Any final thoughts, guys? You can take a few minutes to say your piece. What are your feelings about 2018?
2008. No, you go first, Buck.
Well, I'm going to go after I say my bit, but I personally feel thankful that for this channel, the Distributist, because I think that Dave has provided a very valuable resource for right-wing activists and traditionalists on the traditionalists online, and I think going forward, he's really been doing a lot to build the groundwork, even if we do have disagreements at times. So thank you, Dave.
Oh, well, that's very, very kind words. I probably don't deserve it. Anything else people want to say? 2018.
I'll say this. 2018 is a year of very, very rapid political changes, of like certain movements emerging and then sort of bursting into flames and dying seemingly as quickly. But if there's one thing I think that can be learned from this year, I know he got called out just a little bit ago. I'll point out Sargon. Sargon managed to exhibit anti-fragility when Patreon took him down. And so, like, I know he has a lot of critics right now. I know he's given a very hard time by a lot of people. But there's something that can be learned from him, because his deplatforming on Patreon cost institutions way more than the platforming of many, many people who are to the right of him. So there are lessons to be learned there, and you can always afford to learn even from Sargon.
Yeah.
And I don't know he has many critics, but, give the man his due.
He's an idiot, but this year has been Sargon showing that he has kind of like this Inspector Gadget ability to be total idiot and then somehow fall ass backwards onto the enemy's secret plan and ruin everything for them anyway. But so is there another person, Anarcho? Do you want to take it?
So this year started off wild with the Warski Sargon Spencer debate and the whole blood sports theme that carried on for about maybe I would say 4-5 months before flaming out, as it predictably would. I mean, I never thought just two people screaming at each other ever made for good political or philosophical dialogue. I don't think anyone ever thought it would go much where, and it's pretty much died out by now. With that said, though, I think this. I think as for Sargon, I think he let his arrogance get the best of him. Constantly dealing with the alt right in the fallout of the blood sports drama, and although his arrogance did cost him his financial support for the moment, I think. I mean, I do think he will eventually get his financial backing back. I can't, with the following he has now, I find it very difficult to believe that he wouldn't. He's not an obscure alt-right channel, so unlike others kicked off Patreon, I think this will eventually lead to some kind of reversal. Could be wrong, but uh, and I hope going in 2019 we learn we can from Sargon's case and try to be a little more humble, a little more under the radar. Try to challenge the cathedral by speaking words of truth rather than words of offense. Offense can get you so far, but truth, real impactful, critical truth is what really sticks in the long run. So that's what we got to remember going forward. Are you still there, Dave?
So, thanks for everyone for tuning in. Thank you for giving all the money to charity. It's $106 by my last tabulation. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas, and hopefully we'll see you in the coming year for more live streams.